everyone, welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. And just as I hit record, right outside that window to my right, one bird tried to take on every other bird in the neighborhood, and it was complete chaos for about 10 minutes. So if you hear some birds in the background, that's what's going on. There is an all-out civil war amongst the local birds in my neighborhood, and I don't know what's going to happen with that. So I tried to say, hey, I'm recording here, but that didn't quite work. So because I'm terrible at impressions. But hey, this week's podcast is an interesting topic, and I'm going to talk about some things here in a little bit, and try to approach it in a slightly different way than most Linux podcasters out there. So the first thing is, I have a confession to make. Here it is. The confession is, I'm getting bored with Linux. I love Linux. I love the free and open source software. I love the free and open source community, but I'm getting bored with it. It's stable. It's fun. I use it all the time, and it is my operating system of choice. But I don't know where my next project is, what I want to do next. And I've sort of been struggling with this for a long time now, because I could jump into some software and review software. It's not really my thing. I don't really like doing that. And occasionally, if I have a project to do, I don't mind going down the road and taking that learning curve and learning how to use a free piece of software. But for the sake of a podcast, explaining what the features are in GIMP or the new features in Kdenlive or something like that, I don't really particularly find interesting. And I don't think that, listeners would particularly find it interesting, especially on an audio podcast. I do put the video podcast out on YouTube as of the last few months, and the thing here is, I was sort of struggling for a while, and I don't always cover Linux topics. I jump around, and whatever seems to be interesting to me at the time is what I share with all of you. And when I do that, it's not because I claim to be some sort of expert, or not because I claim to be a professional at that particular topic, but hopefully if I share something and inspires you to go check it out, then I feel like I've done a good job of promoting something or getting the word out about something, and 10,000 other people are going to do it 10,000 other ways. So if you have been listening to this podcast for a while, one of the things that I'd like you to do is check out my website, mrptechreviews.com. That's where I'm going to post all the shows. And you can also check out podnuts.com and go to that website, check out all the shows on that network. But if you've been listening to this show for a while, you will have realized that usually I am somebody that likes a very difficult task, and I like the fact that I can take something that I knew nothing about before and struggle with it for a while and get to a point where I'm about to give up or throw it away or start over for the 10,000th time and expect the same result to happen, complete failure. And usually I am usually at least have some sort of project that I'm working on that is time consuming. It makes me learn something, or just plain simple is something that's difficult that not many people do, or that type of thing. So to give you an example, years ago now, I was looking for the same thing. I was looking for a project, got into amateur radio, got my amateur radio license. I knew nothing about amateur radio at that time, and I still consider myself a beginner at that, even though I have an extra license and I've took all 3 exams. as a challenge to myself. So I knew nothing about it, and now I help out giving exams when they need it. So that's an example. Another example was I wanted to do something special for my tech club at school, and we came up with a project contacting the International Space Station, all of which I've talked about on the show plenty of times. And the idea behind these projects is they were not easy. They were not simple. They were something that I could explain to students. If you really come across something difficult, most people give up, and you can work forward. And even if you ultimately fail at the end, it's not really about the failure. It's about the process. And so I'm going to talk about today the new project that I'm taking on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why I haven't taken it on yet. And but before we get into that, I have a story I want to share you. And this is has nothing to do with technology, has nothing to do with computers, with networking, anything like that. This is an inspirational story, and it has sort of given me a chance to change a few things with how I approach things, and notice the similarities on how I approach things too, with very difficult tasks at hand. And so I'm just going to share this story with you really quickly, and I'll put this link in the show notes because this article is just fascinating to at least me, who is an avid outdoors person. And then I'm going to transition into why I'm talking about this and why I think it's important. Okay, so the story is of a Japanese monk who hiked the same mountain for 1,000 days in a row. He hiked the same mountain for 1,000 days. Okay, this is in Japan, and basically this is a Buddhist monk who hiked up a mountain, and he took an oath basically to do this. And it's a fascinating story. Okay, this is not just a hike up a random mountain. Okay, this is a mountain that climbs 4,000 feet in about 15 miles. So it's a 15-mile route. The route is steep and rocky, has wooden stairs and ladders, ropes, and even chains that help in assisting this. And this 15-mile trip is a round-trip journey that normally takes 16 hours of continuous movement. Now, what happens is this is, and I don't want to dive too deep into this, but the belief of this particular group of monks, they're called marathon monks, and their belief is that they, of course, they're Buddhist, and their path to enlightenment is apparently, if you complete this journey, then you have a much quicker path to enlightenment. So this is their sort of inspiration for doing this. So what they do is they take an oath, and from May to September, they for 100 days, they will continuously do this loop, and basically wearing almost no shoes, very, very thin, light shoes. They will hike this particular course over and over and over, very little rest, very little food, very little water, and they will do this particular journey every year for about 9 years. And the most terrible thing about this is up to the 100th day, you can opt out at any point in time. For these monks, you can opt out at any point in time. After 101 days, if you do not complete your journey, you're expected to take your life. So you carry a rope with you, and you carry a knife, and you can either hang yourself or you can disembowel yourself, and then you have not completed your journey. So only 46 people, I believe, in the last 100 and something years have completed this. And this particular article that I'm talking about is kind of an inspiration, and I don't want to mispronounce names, but this particular monk did complete the 1,000 mountain climbs, the 15-mile trip. And it's just a really incredible story. And he thought that only one point in time he wasn't going to make it. He was sick. He had the flu. He passed out and woke up, and that was the only time that he thought he was going to have to complete that sacred vow of not being able to complete it and taking his life. It was only once he thought that. So this is not something that is easy. Okay. If you've ever been for a 15-mile hike, I'm usually done for at least 3, 4, 5 days after a hike like that. And you do have to prepare yourself for something like that. And to do this over and over and over, for them, it's a different reason. It's part of their religion, it's part of their culture. And I'm not going to get into that here. But the premise is it's a meditative walk. You're supposed to learn a lot about yourself and learn a lot about life and respect all sorts of different things when you're done. And you have lots of time to think. You have lots of time to contemplate all sorts of things. And you complete the journey completely by yourself with some help of other people along the way to help keep you motivated and such like that. Okay, so this is a tremendously difficult task. And with everything going on right now, the coronavirus, everybody's out of work, everybody is home in quarantine. Things are starting to get back to normal, but it's not going to be back to normal for a long time. So I've been spending a lot of time outdoors. I've been recreating. I've been hiking quite a bit. And I came across this article the other day, and I haven't really been a whole lot motivated. I've been doing everything I need to do. I've been teaching. I've been creating assignments for my students, but outside of school, I have not really been super motivated. And I kind of found myself not doing a whole lot. And I felt like I was getting lazy. I don't like to be lazy. I like to work hard. I like to get myself in shape for the summer a little bit. And so I've been hiking quite a little bit. So I thought, usually there's a mountain that I climb that's probably, depending on which way I go, somewhere between 5 and 6 miles. So I started just for fun this week. I wanted to see how many days in a row I could do this and still do everything else. So I'm starting, I'm on day 3 right now, and I don't expect to do 1,000 days. I don't expect to do 100 days. I don't expect to do 10 days. I don't expect to do 4 days. Okay. So I'm just kind of doing this for fun. And after 3 days, I am in so much, my muscles just absolutely hurt. And this is only 6 miles that I've been doing for the last 3 days. I can't even imagine 15 miles of doing this over and over and over again for 100 days straight. They call the marathon monks because ultimately that distance increases quite a bit, and the repetitions increase quite a bit. They have to do 2 100-day cycles in a year, around 6 or 7 years in. Just incredible feat of overcoming adversity and overcoming difficulties and overcoming fear and anxiety and all sorts of different things. Okay, so how does this relate to the technology podcast? Well, I have had something in the back of my mind for years now, and I have not wanted to complete it. I have, but I have not completed it. My journey started with Linux way back in 2009 with Ubuntu. I've mentioned this on the show plenty of times. Got into Arch Linux probably around 2012, 2013, and I learned a whole lot about Linux with Arch Linux. You basically start with a base system and you can build whatever that you want. Arch is great. I absolutely love it. I ran it for a year before I had to reinstall it. Then I reinstalled it. It ran great for a couple more years. I ran Antergos for a while just because it was easier to install. And I didn't find the Arch Linux install to be particularly difficult to do. It's just following directions and following the documentation about how to do it. And once you do that, you have your own Arch Linux installation that you can install whatever you like. You know exactly what's on your system. There was a few things here and there that were buggy, but I learned how to fix them. I learned how to repair them. And then ultimately I just sort of got away from it for a little while, and no reason in particular. It wasn't because I was upset with Arch Linux or how it handled or anything like that. But I've been running Pop! OS now for a couple of years. And the idea that Pop! OS is stable. I enjoy it. It's now my favorite Linux distro for many reasons. But it works so well that I sort of gotten bored with it. And back in the way back of my mind, for about 5 years, has been always wanting to dive into Linux from scratch. Now, many of you out there will know that Linux from scratch is a whole different ballgame from Arch Linux or Gentoo or anything like that. But if you are on Distro Watch, the explanation is Linux from scratch is a project that provides you with the necessary steps to build your own custom Linux system. There are a lot of reasons why somebody would want to build a Linux from scratch system. The question most people raise is why go through all the hassle of manually installing a Linux system from scratch when you can just download existing distributions like Debian or Red Hat? It's a valid question, which they hope to answer this way. The most important reason for Linux from scratch's existence is to teach people how a Linux system works. Building a Linux from scratch system teaches you all about what makes Linux tick, how things work together, and how they depend on each other, and most importantly, how to customize it to your own taste and needs. Okay? So Linux from scratch is basically the ultimate goal if you would like to learn about the inner workings of Linux and customize it, do whatever you like. You're building everything from source, and it's time consuming, very time consuming, and it is a project that, as I went on Distro Watch, it's a project that I discovered has been around since February of 2000. Okay. Ubuntu, for example, has been around since 2004. So Linux from scratch has been around way longer than I anticipated that it would have been. And I'm thinking now that the project that I'm looking for, the project that will sort of give me something to make my brain work and to give my brain a challenge, is Linux from scratch. Now, the reason I have never done this before, for a couple reasons. When I first heard of Linux from scratch, I only had one laptop that was capable of running Linux, and I didn't want to blow away my system to just do this off the cuff and blow away my system with everything that I use every day. Bought the new laptop a couple years ago. I still have my old one, and it's still a pretty decent laptop. Another reason why I have never done Linux from scratch is because it's time consuming. And for a while, especially over this last year, I have been writing grants. I've been applying for funding for my business. I've started another music group. I've been working with this podcast. I've been teaching. I've been working 2 jobs, and I just really didn't have time to sit down and work on Linux from scratch. So another reason why I haven't done Linux from scratch is because I'm scared of it. It's time consuming. It's something that I don't know if my brain can handle. I'm not a IT person. I am not a programmer. I am not a Linux professional, but I play one on TV. And I'm not actually somebody who is what I would consider an expert. I can help people. I know a lot about Linux. I know a lot about a lot of different things, but I don't claim to know everything. And the thought of diving deep into Linux from scratch was sort of a paralyzing fear that I had. And I would watch videos on YouTube, and everybody laughs about Linux from scratch. Everybody, as soon as you mention Linux from scratch, everybody goes, whoa, just do it. And everybody's encouraging. Everybody is saying, that's what it's all about. It's about the learning. You're going to build it. You're going to fail. You're going to fail bad. You're going to fail so bad that you have to start all over again. But that's how you learn. And that moment when you actually build a system that you build is pretty amazing, for somebody who has stuck through it to be able to do it. Now, my intentions are not to build a system that is perfect and it's going to be something that I use every day, and that's going to be something that I'm going to completely abandon Pop! OS. I don't have any thoughts like that. I'm not going to deploy this anywhere. I'm not going to write some custom Linux operating system that's going to run on servers in a warehouse somewhere that I need very specific software on, which is another use for Linux from scratch. I don't have any aspirations for that. But what I do want is a challenge for my brain to do something that I have no idea about. And I have zero knowledge whatsoever about the Linux from scratch process. I read the manual at one point in time. Now, this is the Linux from scratch website. This is another reason why I have not completed, nor not even started Linux from scratch. It's because I have to read a whole lot. And when I read, I mentioned this before, I listen to audiobooks because my eyes go cross-eyed when I read, and I get bored and I skip over things, and I just do not enjoy the physical act of reading something, even on a website or that. I mean, I'll read articles, I'll read all sorts of things if I really need to. But the Linux from scratch documentation, which is incredible, is overwhelming, to say the least. Overwhelmingly thorough, I should say. So if you go to linuxfromscratch.org, you will find everything that you need to know about building a Linux from scratch system. And the first thing is the Linux from scratch book. And if you're going to hopefully build something off the stable version from Linux from scratch, there are books that are available to guide you through that. So if you wanted a systemd version of Linux from scratch, you have everything you need to know, from the table of contents all the way through introduction to preparing for your build, building the packages, and so on. And this may be the challenge that I am looking for. And this may be the thing that turns me from somebody who is bored with Linux to somebody who I don't want to say appreciates, because I already appreciate it. I do love Linux. I love using Linux. I love talking about Linux. I love the free software. I love recommending open source software when I can. But this might be something that gets me over that hurdle to do and explore other things. And I'm not a big person when it comes to, installing custom software for routers or things like that I've just never really been interested in that. I've never been interested in Pi holes with the Raspberry Pi. I've never, that stuff just makes my eyes go cross-eyed. And I say that in a way that I just mean that I get bored doing that stuff. And every once in a while I have an interesting project, like I did the Nextcloud build, rebuild, I should say, recently on a Raspberry Pi 4, and that sort of scratches the itch for a little while until then it's all set up and I have nothing to do again. So I think I may dive into this, and what I'm going to say is I probably am not going to do a show on it next week. I have a guest that I'm lining up for the podcast. We're going to talk about something completely different. It's going to be lots of fun. I don't want to give it away just yet. But in the meantime, with this downtime that I have, I'm going to continue doing some hiking outdoors. But I think I'm really ready now to jump into Linux from scratch, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun. Okay, so now how does this compare to that whole story with the monks? Okay, and I posted this in the Discord room, and I hope everybody reads through it, because it's the story of the monks. Obviously, you're not going to start a 1,000-day journey of climbing a mountain. At least I hope not, and I hope you don't take things so seriously as they do. But you can learn some things from those monks. The 5 lessons that the monks share about mental toughness. Okay, they sort of adopt a commit or die mentality. Now, obviously, that's a real thing to them. This is something that I explain to my students a whole lot. Oftentimes, people get into things and they don't really fully commit about whatever it is they're working on, whether it's being a musician or being a business person or a project they're working on. They have low motivation, lack of focus, procrastination, and it takes a lot for a person to fully commit to something on a massive scale. It's a huge project. And if you can do that, you find that the life is full of unexpected turns and twists, and you find that whether you're successful or not, you have learned a little bit about yourself in the process and what your abilities are. The second thing about mental toughness that they talk about is surrounding yourself with the right people. I wouldn't say 5 years ago I was surrounded by the right people to take on a Linux from scratch project, but I think with people like that are in the Discord room, or other people that I've met recently that are Linux users, I think I'm in the right place now where I can do that. You have to be able to ruthlessly minimize distractions. And this is my biggest problem when it comes to something where I have to read documentation over and over and over. If you're ruthlessly minimizing distractions, that means you actually sit down and force yourself to do it, and don't do anything else until you get started and get that process going. And here's another great one about mental toughness, that forgetting the goal, focusing on the process. I've sort of said this a couple of times. Forgetting the goal about having a working system, just do the process, Linux from scratch, and be prepared to fail, be prepared to work. Okay, so very relatable from the marathon monks to doing something difficult like Linux from scratch. Lastly, pursue a higher purpose beyond your goals. And the higher purpose, I think, here is not having a Linux from scratch setup where I have my own custom Linux distribution that I'm going to use forever. My goal here is to learn, to get better, and to use those skills that I've learned to on to my next project. So whatever that next project is. And I'll have a better understanding of how everything works. So now you know why I've never done Linux from scratch. Now you also know that Linux from scratch is probably my next project. And if anybody else would like to take on that same goal, too, let me know. mrptechreviews@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. You can ask any question you would like. I'm going to keep posting these shows on YouTube, and we're going to get this out as quickly as possible. And I'd love to hear from all the listeners. So if you are listening out there for the first time or for the 182nd time, love to hear from you. You can join in our Discord chat room too. We'd love to talk with you there. That's going to do it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. We will see you next time.